The Galactic Union Military Academy floated in the darkness of space like a metal flower made of steel and glass, and 1,000 different dreams from 1,000 different worlds station. Helion 9 was its official name, but the cadets who lived and trained there simply called it the Forge, because that was what it did to young beings from across the galaxy. It took them in raw and unformed, and it hammered them into something harder and sharper and ready for the Universic Thrall had arrived. At the Forge 80 months ago, with hope burning bright in all four of his hearts, he was Valorian, a species known for their gentle nature and their skill with technology, rather than weapons, and he had come to the Academy because he wanted to prove that his people could be more than just engineers and scientists. He wanted to show the galaxy that Valorians could stand alongside any warrior from any world, but the galaxy, it seemed, had other ideas. The corridor was empty and cold, and the lights above flickered in that way they always did in the older sections of the station where the maintenance crews rarely bothered to visit. Kithro pressed his back against the wall and felt the chill of metal through his uniform as his compound. Eyes darted from one face to another. 3 Dravosi surrounded him. The Dravosi were everything the Valorians were not. They came from a heavy world with crushing gravity, and their bodies had evolved to match that brutal environment scales covered. Their skin like armor and their muscles were dense and powerful, and their claws could tear through metal plating without effort. The largest of them was called Vorik, and he held the rank of Commandant Aspirant, which meant he was only 2 years away from graduating and receiving his commission. His yellow eyes gleamed with a hatred that made Cathral's stomach twist with fear. "Your people voted against the mining accord," Vorak said, and his voice was like gravel scraping against stone. Cathral tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat because he knew that nothing he said would matter. The mining accord had been a political matter decided by leaders far above his station, and yet here he was about to pay the price for a decision he had no part in making. "I did not vote," he finally managed to say. "I am only a cadet, and I have no voice in such things." Vorik laughed, and it was an ugly sound full of contempt. "All Valorians are the same," he said. "Weak and cowardly, and always hiding behind excuses." He gestured to his companions, and they moved forward with devices in their hands. Magnetic restraints that Kethral recognized immediately as illegal modifications to standard cadet equipment before he could run or cry out or do anything at all. They had locked his forearms against the wall, and he was trapped like an insect pinned to a board. "The instructors will not come," Vorik said as he noticed Kethral's eyes looking toward the corridor's security sensors. "We have taken care of that already." The station's AI had been looped somehow, another violation of Academy rules that carried severe punishment. But Kethral understood with terrible clarity that these 3 did not fear punishment. They believed themselves untouchable, and perhaps they were right. The Dravosi hegemony was one of the most powerful political forces in the Galactic Union, and the families of these 3 cadets held positions of tremendous influence. Who would believe a Valorian over them? Who would even care enough to ask? "Someone has to teach your people their place," Vorik continued, and he raised his clawed hand, and Kethral could see exactly what was going to happen. Strike from a Dravosi at full strength would shatter his exoskeleton and break the fragile bones beneath, and even if he survived, his body would never fully recover. His dreams of becoming a warrior would end right here in this forgotten corridor. He closed his compound eyes and tried to think of home, and the warm winds that swept across the crystal plains, and the faces of his family who had been so proud when he left for the Academy. He heard Vorik grunt with effort as he began his strike, and then something unexpected happened. A sound, soft footsteps approaching quickly, and a voice that cut through the air like a blade. "Let him go." Kethral opened his eyes. A girl stood in the corridor behind the Dravosi, and everything about her seemed wrong for this moment. She was small, barely reaching the chest of even the shortest of the three attackers, and her body looked soft and fragile in the way that made other species dismiss her kind as weak. Her skin was pale and her hair was dark and pulled back in the regulation style required of all cadets, and she wore the gray uniform that marked her as a first-year student human Earthborn. The humans had only joined the Galactic Union 18 cycles ago, and they were considered by most to be barely worth acknowledging. A primitive species from a single unremarkable planet who had somehow stumbled into faster-than-light travel almost by accident. They had no great fleets and no ancient history of conquest and no reputation for anything except their strange persistence and their unsettling. Endurance of Oric did not even bother to turn around fully to face her. "This does not concern you, primate," he said, and his voice dripped with dismissal. "Walk away while you still can." The girl did not walk away. Instead, she stepped closer, and her dark eyes moved across the scene with a calculating precision that made something cold settle in the base of Kethral's spine. "I am making it concern me," she said, and her voice was calm and steady and carried no trace of the fear that any reasonable being should feel when facing three Dravosi warriors. "The Valorians are under Earth's protection compact, and that makes him my business. The other two." Dravosi laughed, and the sound echoed through the corridor like the barking of predators who had just spotted easy prey. "Protection compact," one of them repeated. Earth can barely protect itself, and you think you can protect him." The girl smiled, and it was a strange expression that did not reach her eyes, and Kethral felt a shiver run through him because he had never seen anything quite like it before. "My name is Cadet Mira-chan," she said. "You're going to want to remember that." Vorak finally turned to face her fully, and his massive form blocked out the light as he loomed over her like a mountain made of scales and muscle and barely contained violence. "Little human," he said, "I am going to hurt you very badly, and then I'm going to finish what I started with the Valorian, and no one will ever know what happened here." Myra Chum looked up at him, and her smile did not waver. "No," she said quietly, "you are not." And then she moved. Mira-Chen had been walking back to her quarters after a long session in the Academy's library when she heard the voices coming from corridor 7. Deltash had been studying the tactical doctrines of the Hegemony Wars because her instructors expected her to know these things, and because knowledge was a weapon that never ran out of ammunition. The voices made her stop. There was cruelty in those voices, the kind of cruelty that came from beings who believed they could do whatever they wanted without consequence, and Mira had heard that tone before in different languages on different worlds and even on Earth itself. She had learned long ago that such voices never meant anything good, so she followed the sounds, and she found herself looking at a scene that made her blood run cold and then hot with a quiet fury that she kept carefully hidden behind her calm expression. The Valorian cadet was pinned to the wall with magnetic restraints, and 3 Dravosi upperclassmen were about to beat him so badly that he might never recover. The Valorians were not warriors by nature. They were builders and dreamers and creators of beautiful things, and seeing one of them trapped like this stirred something deep and old and very human inside. Myra's chest, she did not think about the odds. She did not calculate her chances of survival. She simply walked forward and spoke 2 words that stopped everything. "Let him go." The largest Dravosi, the one called Vorak, whose family name she recognized from her political studies, did not even look at her properly when he told her to walk away. That was his first mistake. Myra had grown up on Earth in a small town in what used to be called China, and her grandmother had taught her many things about the world and about people and about the nature of conflict. One of those lessons had stayed with her above all others. The moment someone dismisses you, her grandmother had said, that is the moment you have already won, because they have stopped seeing you as a threat, and a threat that is not seen is the most dangerous threat of all. Vorak did not see Myra as a threat. He saw her as an annoyance, A small soft creature that had wandered into the wrong place at the wrong time. And that blindness would cost him dearly. The Valorians are under Earth's protection compact. Mira said, that makes him my business. The protection compact was a formal agreement that Earth had made with several smaller species during its integration into the Galactic Union. It stated simply that Earth would stand as guardian and ally to those who had no great fleets or powerful armies of their own, and that any attack on a protected species would be considered an attack on Earth itself. Most of the galaxy viewed this compact as a joke, the empty posturing of a primitive species trying to seem important. But Myra knew something that the rest of the galaxy had not yet learned. Did not make empty promises. Humans had spent their entire history fighting wars against opponents who were stronger and faster and better equipped. And they had won those wars not through superior strength, but through something far more dangerous. They had won through sheer stubborn refusal to accept defeat. When the two other Dravasi laughed at her, Mira felt nothing but a cold and patient calm settle over her thoughts. She had been trained for moments like this, not at the academy. The academy taught standard combat techniques designed for beings with scales, or claws, or multiple limbs. But on Earth, in dojos and training halls, where humans had spent thousands of years perfecting the art of fighting opponents who outmatched them physically. Her father had been a soldier, her mother had been a martial arts instructor, and her grandmother had been something else entirely. Something from the old days, before first contact, when humans still fought each other with frightening regularity. Myra had learned from all of them. My name is Cadet Mira-chan. She said, you are going to want to remember that. Vorik finally turned to face her, and his shadow fell across her like the darkness of an eclipse, and his yellow eyes burned with contempt and amusement, and the absolute certainty that he was about to hurt her. Little human, he growled. I'm going to hurt you very badly. Mira looked up at him, and she thought about all the times in human history when someone small had faced something large, and everyone had expected the small one to fall. David and Goliath, the defenders at Thermopylae, the resistance fighters in 100 different wars across 1,000 different years. Humans had always been small compared to the universe, and they had always fought anyway. No, she said, you are not. Vorik moved first because he was confident and because he believed his speed and strength made him untouchable. His clawed hand swept toward her face with enough force to crush bone and tear flesh and end this confrontation before it truly began. Myra was not there when the blow arrived. She had already shifted her weight and dropped beneath his reach, and the lessons of her grandmother flowed through her muscles like water, finding its natural path. Fighting is not about strength, the old woman had told her many years ago. It is about understanding your own body, and understanding your enemy's body, and understanding the space between you. Myra understood the space between them very well. Dravasi were strong and fast, and their scales could deflect most weapons, but they had weaknesses, just like every other species in the galaxy. During Earth's integration into the Union, human doctors and scientists had been given access to the medical databases of 1,000 different worlds, and they had studied those databases with the same obsessive attention to detail that had once helped humans hunt mammoths and build empires and split the atom. They had mapped every nerve cluster and pressure point and vulnerable joint of every major species. They had done this because humans always prepared for the worst. And now Myra Chen was going to demonstrate exactly why that preparation mattered. She caught Vorik's wrist as his blow passed over her head, and she twisted her body in a motion that her grandmother had called redirecting the river. And suddenly, all of his strength and momentum were working against him instead of for him. He stumbled forward, surprised and off balance for perhaps the first time in his life, and Mira helped him along with a precise strike to the nerve cluster behind his knee. The big Dravasi went down with a crash that shook the corridor floor. The Other two stared at her with expressions of pure disbelief. Your friend will be fine, Myra said calmly. The same cannot be said for you if you do not release the Valorian right now. They did not release the Valorian. Instead, they attacked, and Myra-chan showed them exactly what an Earthborn girl could do when she decided that someone needed protecting. What happened in Corridor 7 Delta over the next 17 seconds would be analyzed by Academy instructors for years to come. They would slow down the footage and study every movement and try to understand how a single human girl had defeated 3 Dravosi warriors in close combat. They would never fully succeed. The first Dravosi to reach Myra after Vorak fell was called Threx, and he was faster than most members of his species, and his claws were extended and ready to tear through. Her soft human flesh Myra did not try to block his attack because blocking a Dravosi strike would break human bones like dry twigs. Instead, she flowed around it. Her body moved in ways that seemed almost impossible to the observers who would later watch the footage, bending and twisting and sliding through spaces that should not have been large enough to contain her. And Threx's claws found only empty air where she had been a heartbeat before. Humans are persistent predators, one of O's. The Academy's xenobiology instructors would explain months later to a classroom of fascinated cadets. They evolved on a world where they were not the fastest or the strongest, but they survived anyway by being the most stubborn and the most adaptable creatures on their planet. Myra was being very adaptable right now. She came up inside Threx's guard, so close that his longer arms could not reach her effectively, and her hands moved with a precision that spoke of countless hours of practice. She struck a nerve cluster on the inside of his arm that made his claws retract involuntarily. She pressed against a pressure point on his neck that sent waves of dizziness crashing through his brain. She grabbed his wrist and twisted and used the momentum of his own failed attack to send him crashing into the wall beside the still restrained Valorian. 2 seconds had passed since the fight began. Third Dravosi was called Kren, and he was the smartest of the 3, which meant he did not rush forward like his companions had done. Instead, he pulled a weapon from his belt, a shock rod that was standard equipment for Academy security, but definitely not standard equipment for cadets, and he activated it with a crackling hum of electricity. Clever. Human, he said, and there was a new note of caution in his voice. But you cannot dodge forever. He was right about that. Myra could not dodge forever, and she did not intend to try. You know what the most dangerous thing about humans is? She asked, as she circled slowly to her left, keeping her eyes fixed on the weapon in his hand. Kren did not answer, but she continued anyway. It is not our strength because we are not very strong, and it is not our speed because we are not very fast, and it is not our claws or fangs or scales because we do not have any of those things. She took another step, and Kren matched her movement, keeping the distance between them constant. The most dangerous thing about humans is that we think, she said. We study, and we learn, and we prepare for every possibility because we had to, because our world was full of things that could kill us, and we survived anyway. Behind Kren, Vorak was beginning to stir, and Myra knew she was running out of time when Earth joined the Union. She continued, our scientists were given access to the medical databases of every member species. And do you know what they did with that information? Kren's eyes narrowed. They mapped every weakness, Myra said, every nerve cluster, and every pressure point and every vulnerable joint of every major species, including yours. She smiled, and it was the same cold expression she had worn earlier, the smile that did not reach her eyes. I know exactly how to hurt you, Kren, and I know exactly how to do it without causing permanent damage, and I know that the Academy's medical staff will be able to fix everything I break. Kren lunged forward with the shock rod, and Myra moved. She did not try to disarm him directly because that would have been foolish. Instead, she grabbed his wrist and pulled him forward and used his momentum to throw him off. Balanced, the shock rod swung past her head, close enough that she could feel the static electricity raising the fine hairs on her skin. She twisted his arm in a direction that Dravosi arms were not designed to bend, and Kren screamed as the joint hyperextended. Shockrod fell from his grip, and Mira kicked it away down the corridor. Then she struck him 3 times in rapid succession. Nerve cluster and pressure point and vulnerable joint. And Kren collapsed to the floor beside his companions. Behind her, she heard Vorak rising to his feet with a growl of pure rage. Turned to face him, the big Dravosi's yellow eyes were burning with hatred, and his scales had flushed dark with the blood rushing beneath them, and every muscle in his body was tensed for violence. "I am going to kill you," he said, and his voice was thick with fury. "I do not care about the consequences anymore." Myra looked at him calmly. "No, you are not," she said, "because you are going to think about what just happened, and you are going to realize something very important." She walked toward him slowly and deliberately, and she did not flinch when he raised his clawed hand. "I just defeated 3 Dravosi warriors in less than 20 seconds, she said. "And I did it without even getting scratched. And I did it while you had a weapon, and I had nothing." She stopped directly in front of him, close enough that he could have grabbed her if he wanted to. "Now imagine what I could do if I was actually trying to hurt you." Vorak stared at her, his hand trembled, and then slowly, so slowly that it seemed to take forever, he lowered his arm. Myra nodded once, and then she turned her back on him and walked to the wall where Kethril was still pinned. She pulled a small device from her pocket and disabled the magnetic restraints, and the Valorian slumped forward into her arms. "Can you walk?" she asked. Kethril managed a weak nod, even though his legs were shaking. "Good," Myra said. "Medical bay, and then we are going to have a very long conversation with the Academy Commandant." She helped him stand upright, and together they began walking down the corridor, leaving 3 groaning Dravosi behind them. 17 seconds. That was all it had taken. Galaxy was about to learn what that meant. By the time the station's artificial sun had risen over the Academy's main concourse, the incident in Corridor 7 Delta had reached every level of authority on station. Helion 9 Academy Commandant Vresh, an ancient being from a species known for their judicial temperament, sat behind her desk and reviewed the evidence with growing disbelief. 3 Dravosi cadets from powerful families had been caught using illegal equipment to assault a Valorian student, and they had been stopped by a single human girl who had barely completed her first year of training. The political implications were enormous. The Dravosi hegemony was already demanding that Mira Chun be expelled, and that the footage of the incident be sealed, and that the whole matter be quietly forgotten. They were not getting any of those things. "The evidence is clear," Commandant Vresh said to the assembly of officers and diplomats gathered in her conference chamber. "Commandant Aspirant Vorak and Cadets Threx and Kren are guilty of unauthorized weapons modifications and tampering with Academy security systems and assault on a fellow cadet." The Dravosi ambassador, a massive scaled figure whose presence dominated the room, slammed his fist on the table. "This is an outrage," he bellowed. "The word of 3 noble Dravosi warriors should carry more weight than the accusations of a primitive Earthborn female." A soft voice spoke from the other side of the room. Perhaps the ambassador would like to see the footage. Everyone turned to look at the speaker, a thin human man in a simple gray suit who represented Earth's diplomatic mission to the Academy. His name was James Wong, and he had the kind of face that people tended to forget 5 minutes after meeting him. That forgettable quality had made him very effective at his job. "The footage," James repeated. "Every cadet at this Academy wears a standard recording device as part of their uniform, and Cadet Chun was wearing hers during the incident." The Dravosi ambassador's scales paled slightly. "She was required to deactivate her recorder," he said. "Academy regulations state that recording devices must be turned off in non-training areas. That regulation applies to standard corridors." "Commandant," Resh said. Corridor 7 Delta is classified as a secondary training area, which means recording devices may remain active. James Wong smiled, and it was a very small smile that carried an enormous amount of weight. The footage has already been verified by Academy technical staff, he said. It shows exactly what happened from the moment Cadet Chun arrived until she escorted Cadet Kethrol to the medical bay. He paused. It also shows her asking the 3 Dravosi cadets to release the Valorian peacefully. Before any physical confrontation occurred, the room was very quiet. Additionally, James continued, the Earth delegation has compiled a report showing similar incidents involving Dravosi cadets over the past 15 years. Incidents that were quietly settled through diplomatic channels and never resulted in serious consequences for the perpetrators. He slid a datapad across the table toward the commandant. 47 incidents, he said. 47 cases where members of smaller or weaker species were attacked or intimidated or harassed by Dravosi cadets, and 47 times the matter was swept away because no one wanted to offend the hegemony. The Dravosi ambassador looked like he wanted to say something, but no words came out. This report has been forwarded to every member of the Galactic Union Council, James said, along with the footage from Corridor 7 Delta. You cannot do this, the ambassador finally managed. This will cause a diplomatic crisis. James Wong stood up from his seat and walked to the window that looked out over the Academy's central courtyard, where cadets from 100 different worlds trained side by side. Earth joined this union because we believed in its ideals, he said. We believed in the promise that every species, no matter how small or how weak, deserved to stand as equals under the law. He turned back to face the room. We are tired of watching that promise be broken. The footage was released to Union Network's 3 hours. Later within a day, it had been viewed by billions of beings across thousands of worlds. Commentary sections exploded with analysis and debate, and a growing sense of something that the galaxy had not felt in a very long time. Change. Did you see her eyes? One popular commentator wrote. She was not angry, and she was not scared. She was calculating like a predator, sizing up its prey. The humans have been in space for less than 2 decades, another noted. How have they developed combat techniques that can defeat Dravosi warriors? Earth's gravity is one standard. A xenobiologist explained. They evolved as persistence predators, which means they hunted prey by chasing it until it collapsed from exhaustion. Their bodies are designed for endurance. An adaptation, not raw power. Note to self, the most shared comment read, never start a fight with a human. But beyond the commentary and the analysis, something else was happening. Something quieter and more important. Cadets from smaller species began approaching Earth students. They asked questions and shared stories, and discovered that Earth's protection compact was not just a piece of paper. It was a promise, and humans always kept their promise. Svorek and his companions were expelled from the Academy, and their families' political power could do nothing to save them. The Dravosi hegemony filed formal protests and threatened sanctions and made loud noises about this being an insult to their honor. Earth responded with a single statement released through official channels. We stand with those who cannot stand alone, and we will continue to do so regardless of threats or pressure from any power in this galaxy. The galaxy was beginning to understand that these were not empty words. Earth meant every single one of them. 3 months had passed since the incident in Corridor 7 Delta, and the Academy had changed in ways both subtle and profound. Most obvious change was the way cadets moved through the station's corridors and gathering spaces. Groups that had once been separated by species and political alliance now mixed together more freely, and at the center of many of these new groupings, you could find human students talking and laughing and sharing meals with beings from dozens of different worlds. Myra Chun sat in the Academy's common area with a datapad in her hands and a cup of Earth tea cooling beside her elbow, she was studying tactical scenarios again. She was always studying something, but part of her attention was focused on the room. Around her, cadets of a dozen species had taken to sitting near the tables. Claimed by Earth's delegation, they did not always ask for anything, and they did not always speak, but they were present in a way that they had not been before. There was safety in that presence, and everyone knew it. Cathral lowered himself into the seat across from Mira, and his forearms moved in a gesture that she had learned to recognize as Valorian nervousness. His exoskeleton had fully healed, and the Academy's medical staff had done excellent work repairing the damage from the magnetic restraints, but some wounds went deeper than the physical. "You never explained," he said, and his voice was quiet so that only she could hear. "Why did you help me that day?" Myra looked up from her datapad. "The protection compact," she began, but Cathral shook his head. "The protection compact is barely enforced," he said. "Everyone knows this, and you knew it too, and yet you still walked into that corridor and faced 3 Dravosi warriors who could have killed you." He leaned forward. "Why?" Mira was quiet for a long moment. She thought about her grandmother and her parents and her home on Earth and all the things she had learned about being human in a universe that did not always make room for creatures like her on Earth. She finally said, "We have a saying that the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing." She set down her datapad. "I saw something evil happening," she said, "and I was not going to do nothing. Even though you could have been expelled," Cathral pressed. "Even though the Dravosi might have killed you." Something flickered in Myra's eyes. The same cold, calculating look that had appeared in that corridor 3 months ago. "They could not have killed me. It was not a boast. It was a statement of fact delivered with the same calm certainty that she might use to describe the laws of physics or the patterns of stars." Cathral studied her for a long moment. "Your people are strange, Myra Chem. We know." She smiled, and this time the expression reached her eyes and warmed them, and she looked like the young woman she actually was instead of the warrior she could become when circumstances demanded. "But we are also very loyal to our friends," she said. "The Valorians are under our protection now, all of you, and the galaxy is going to learn what that means." Across the common area, a group of human cadets were sitting with students from 6 smaller species. Valorians in Kintari and Pelish, and others who had spent generations being overlooked and pushed aside by the larger powers of the Union. They were teaching each other games from their homeworlds, and sharing stories, and building the kind of bonds that would last lifetimes. One of the human students noticed Myra watching and raised his hand. In a small wave, she waved back. "This is what Earth does," she said to Cathral. "We find friends and we keep them, and we make sure that no one ever hurts them again." "But why?" Cathral asked. "What does Earth gain from protecting species like mine?" Myra considered the question carefully. "Do you know what humanity's greatest achievement was?" she asked. "It was not our technology or our art or our cities or our ships that carried us to the stars." She picked up her tea and took a small sip. "Our greatest achievement was learning that strength means nothing if you do not use it to protect those who are weaker." She gestured around the common area at the mixed groups of cadets. "We spent thousands of years hurting each other," she said. "We fought wars over land and resources and ideas, and we caused so much suffering that sometimes it seemed like we would destroy ourselves before we ever reached the stars." Her eyes grew distant. "But we also learned," she said. "We learned that the strongest nations were not the ones with the biggest armies, but the ones that took care of their people and their allies and their friends." She looked back at Cathral. "Earth is strong now. Not compared to the hegemony or the old empires, but strong enough. And we have decided to use that strength to protect others instead of to conquer them. That is very different from how the rest of the galaxy operates." "Yes," Myra agreed. "It is." She finished her tea and set the cup aside. The Galactic Union thought that humanity's admission was a curiosity, she said. They thought we were a primitive species barely worth acknowledging. Too soft and too small to matter in the great games of power that shaped this galaxy. Her smile returned, but there was an edge to it now. They are beginning to understand their error. Kethril thought about this for a long time. He thought about the footage that had spread across the Union and the changes he had seen at the Academy, and the way that other species now looked at humans with a mixture of curiosity and something that might have been hope. What happens now? He asked. Myra stood up and gathered her datapad and her empty cup. Now we keep doing what we have always done, she said. We make friends and we keep promises, and we show the galaxy that there is another way to be strong. She paused and looked down at him. The Valorians have been under Earth's protection for 3 months, she said. That means you are our friends now, and humans do not abandon their friends. She reached out and touched one of his upper arms gently. Welcome to the family, Kethril. Then she walked away to join her fellow humans, leaving the Valorian cadet sitting alone with his thoughts. But he was not really alone anymore. He understood that now none of the protected species were alone anymore. Earth had seen them, and Earth had claimed them, and Earth would stand with them against whatever the galaxy might bring. The decades that followed, historians would look back on this moment as the beginning of a new era, the moment when humanity's true nature became clear to the rest of the universe. They were not conquerors, they were not predators, despite what their biology might suggest. They were guardians, and the galaxy would never be the same.